Hello, everyone. Welcome to our webinar today. This webinar is being presented by the Clean Energy States Alliance, and the topic for today's webinar is virtual power plants and energy justice. Today's date is April 22nd, 2026, and we have an excellent panel of guest speakers with us today, but before I pass it over to them, I'd like to go over a few webinar logistics. All attendees are in listen-only mode, so your webcam and microphone are disabled. The chat function is also disabled, so if you would like to submit questions and comments, you can do so via the Q&A panel. We will be saving about 15 minutes at the end of the presentations to address audience questions, so please submit your questions as you think of them throughout the presentation, and then we'll address them at the end. Automated captions are available for today's webinar. Speakers' bios will be made available in the chat as they're being introduced. And finally, this webinar is being recorded. We will email you a webinar recording within 48 hours, and it will also be posted on CESA's website at cesa.org/webinars. And with that, I'd like to pass it over to our host for today, my colleague Warren Leon.
Hey, thank you very much, Zareen. Before I introduce the webinar, I want to let folks know that the Clean Energy States Alliance is a national nonprofit coalition of public agencies and organizations that are all working on clean energy, primarily in the electricity sector, and our members are mostly state agencies and include many of the most successful public funders of clean energy initiatives. You can, in the next slide, see logos of our many members across the country in 21 states. Zareen, there we go. There's our logos. And if we could go to the next slide, this event is one of the first activities in a new initiative for the Clean Energy States Alliance, which is the Virtual Power Plant Acceleration Initiative. We're working to help states, local governments, communities, and financial institutions advance affordability, strengthen grid reliability, and support decarbonization, all by scaling up virtual power plants. Our goal is to enable gigawatt scale VPP deployment across the country, and we're doing this in coordination with several other organizations, including the World Resources Institute, Clean Energy Group, and Justice Climate Fund. If we can go to the next slide. Today we're combining two topics that are of great interest. There's a lot of interest these days in virtual power plants, and there's also a lot of interest in energy justice. So what could be better than combining these two important and interesting topics? So that's what we're going to do. We're going to have two speakers. I'm going to introduce the first speaker now, Adam Warren, and then I'll introduce the second speaker, Lisa Morris, before she speaks in about 25 minutes. Adam Warren is an energy systems leader whose career has spanned national laboratories, industry, and academia. He was director of the Accelerated Deployment and Decision Support Center at the National Renewable Energy Lab. He also served as founding co-director of the Advanced Energy Systems graduate program at the Colorado School of Mines, and he previously held sustainability roles at PepsiCo. He holds a PhD in chemical engineering from McMaster University. So let me turn it over to Adam. Thank you.
Thanks, Warren. I appreciate the opportunity to speak with your group. And happy Earth Day, everyone. Just a quick check. Are you able to see my screen? And can everyone hear me okay?
Looks good.
All right. Thanks, Doreen. All right. So I want to talk about two topics that I'm very passionate about. And like I said, Warren and team, I appreciate the opportunity to speak with this group. Virtual power plants and energy justice, and how one can enable the other. Start off with a quick snapshot of what the grid is doing today. Despite what you've heard, the energy transition continues apace, maybe not as quickly as we'd like it to be, but we continue along the energy transition. If you look at this image here on the left, annual U.S. electricity consumption has basically tracked with economic growth for several decades now. And you can see the growth here, EIA data over the last few decades. Perhaps a bit of an uptick here the last few years, driven by a number of things. One of those issues, which helped me also create these slides, is we're all familiar with AI and the rapid growth of data centers across the world and across our nation. So you see the top right here, some of the data on the data center demand across the U.S. and where it's centered. Just an amazing amount of development of that infrastructure and straining the grid as we're seeing that. Likewise, we're seeing expanded use of electric vehicles, and so the demand on the grid is increasing over time while we continue the energy transition. So here's just a few numbers on the share of renewable energy on the grid, going from 13% a decade ago to 24%. Wind and solar generation up over 250 terawatt hours now. Thanks to Swanson's law, which is our name for the experience curve governing the price of solar. Solar's just going to continue to expand. We're not pushing on a rope anymore. It's the cheapest megawatt hour out there, and we'll continue to deploy solar no matter what the headwinds are. And I don't know if anyone has come up with a experience curve name for what storage is doing, but storage drops in price year after year as well. And so we'll increasingly see storage applied. So that means the grid's going to be more difficult or more interesting, let's say, to control as we push forward. And one of the tactics that we're looking at is virtual power plants. So instead of how we've always operated the grid, which is kind of with one hand tied behind our back, where demand fluctuates as it will, and then we match supply and demand by moving our generation around. Increasingly, what we're looking at as virtual power plants. Well, I'm not sure who named that, but basically it's just saying simply, we've got a lot of flexible demand out there. Let's leverage that flexible demand to keep that balance at all times. So I don't care if my heat pump turns off for the next 30 minutes. I don't care if my electric vehicle is parked in the garage, stops charging for a little bit. I'm still getting those energy services, but I can flex around those more advanced electrified loads so that we balance that supply and demand. So you're seeing virtual power plants take off across the nation, and I think we'll continue to see virtual power plants be an important part of our energy sector. Now, that's the technology, and often we technical folk think, okay, well, we got the technology, we've got the solution. But then when we get a little more sophisticated, you think, well, yes, you have the technical part, but you got to figure out the policies and to create the markets to create the solutions that you need. And then as you delve in, you really got to think about the human dimension as well. So as we make decisions about the energy system, that affects the performance of the energy system. And then, of course, the performance energy system affects human well-being. So to really think about this massive transition of our shared energy system, we have to think about the technology, the policies, the markets, and the social dimension of that. That's what we talk about when we talk about energy justice. So, I think this basically says what I just said. The core question is not just whether virtual power plants will scale, but who benefits, who bears the risk, and who gets to participate in this changing grid. And the expanded use of VPPs can improve energy outcomes or reproduce or even worsen inequities that are prevalent in our system. And so, how do we think about energy justice? Well, this term, energy justice, if you're not familiar with the term, we think about it through. There's a number of ways they think about it. But if you look at the literature, there's kind of four buckets that people mostly talk about energy justice. Um, and briefly, one is distributed justice. That's basically, who receives the benefits and who bears the costs of this transition. Procedural justice. How are people participating in decision making in any of these programs that we roll out as we go through the transition? Recognitional justice is so important. Whose needs? Whose constraints, whose vulnerabilities are being considered as we design this system of systems, and then restorative justice. That focuses more on past harms of our energy system, such as pollution or displacement, and thinks about as we invest in the energy system of the future, how can we restore some of those past injustices and make up for those past injustices to communities that were harmed? So if you're thinking about energy justice, this is one of the ways. There's other ways to think about it, but I think these four buckets are a nice encapsulation of what we're talking about when we think about energy justice. So virtual power plants themselves are neither just nor unjust. They're technology meant to balance the grid, but they can worsen or just reproduce some inequalities in some important ways. And so this slide captures how they can reproduce or worsen some inequalities that we need to be considering as we design these systems. One thing is we need to focus on if we just focus on assets, if those who get to participate and benefit from virtual power plants, if it all depends on, you have an EV in the garage or solar or storage in the garage, on the roof or in the garage, then benefits can accrue disproportionately to higher income owners. Okay, so we don't want VPPs to create a new energy elite as we roll out these VPP programs. Another way it can create injustices through within consent. So complex tariffs, automation, hard to understand controls for these systems can mean that households who are less well off can bear comfort or reliability risks without really having meaningful input into whether they want to have those systems. Unequal constraints. Energy poor households also face tighter comfort. So they might be in older buildings, maybe a little bit less energy efficient. And so moving around energy services, maybe in a household that's well insulated, they're not going to notice that change, but a less insulated home might. So we need to not just design the system for a quote unquote average customer, but really think hard about how this will help less people more burdened by energy services or lack thereof. And then privacy concerns. VPPs rely on detailed household and device data. And do people really understand what they're signing up for and make sure that we're not creating privacy concerns for any involved in a virtual power plant program? But fortunately, VPPs can also improve the equitable outcomes by really intentionally target some of these burdens, target equitable access, and target resilience. So here's four excellent ways that we're seeing virtual power plants address energy justice. They can reduce local air pollution by, instead of running a peaker plant, let's lower demand across the system. So don't even turn that peaker plant up or not, or don't exercise that peaker plant because, as we know, peaker plants often are operating in disadvantaged communities. And so if we design our VPP program to value this localized and temporal benefits of the VPPs so that they can reduce the burden of peaker plants that obviously fall in more disadvantaged communities. That's a great outcome for VPPs. In general, VPPs lower system costs. That's why we're deploying them. But we need to think about how those savings, so distributional justice, how those savings flowing to different consumers. And we're seeing is often their design implication is that they're pairing VPPs with other low marginal, low income adders and non-ownership pathways so that benefits can be shared by all and not just we energy elites who have the EV in the garage and the solar panels on the roof. Now, VPPs obviously can improve the resilience of the grid during extreme events, and so we need to think about how we share that improved resilience with all ratepayers and target that back to the restorative justice, target that at those who have been disadvantaged in the past. And another thing we need to think about is on the procedural justice is to enable community-centered participation. Not everyone has a roof, obviously. So how do we promote community-centered DER aggregation to improve access to LMI households, closing renters, multifamily households, and the like. There's some good examples of that. For example, Hannah, if you're on, you can talk about some of the work you've done in Puerto Rico on this topic. So here's ways that VPPs can improve equity outcomes. Just checking my time. Look like so 5 quick design principles for energy justice centered virtual power plants. In summary, value services, not assets. Compensates flexibility from low capital devices and aggregator-owned equipment to broaden participation. So we're not creating these quote unquote energy elites. Embed protections by default. Guarantee override rights, bounds on how much the temperature of a building can fluctuate. Things like medical exemptions are very important to shield those that are more vulnerable in our societies. Back to the procedural justice, enable informed participation. So make sure that the rules that we come up with are transparent, communicated in plain language, and communicated through trusted community intermediaries. That requires a lot more effort, but that effort is worth it if we're going to roll out these high impact programs and processes. And then we need to think about where we're targeting these benefits. So prioritize these deployment where avoiding congestion, like I said, around peaker plants can yield community health benefits. So again, back to the concept of as we make these investments in our shared energy future of the future, can we restore some of the past injustices of the energy system we've created in the past? And then finally, you can't you need to measure equity and outcomes explicitly. So I'm tracking enrollment, retention, impacts, and who feels those impacts, comfort outcomes across the groups. So you can't manage what you don't measure. So it's very important that as you develop these programs, you are thinking through how we're managing. We're not just managing megawatt hours and megawatts, but we're thinking about the ECJ components. So if you want to see some, and we'll share these slides with all these connections. We'll hear a bit about Vermont's success here in a bit. California's SCHIP program has been around for decades. It's a great example. Connecticut has energy storage solutions program. That's probably some of the top three examples of VPP programs underway. If you haven't seen it, the Warren's group has Hannah put out a great report on Puerto Rico's consumer battery energy sharing program. The Puerto Rico's a Sun Run did some great work on a VPP program for a very vulnerable grid there in Puerto Rico. And then Hawaii always has been a leader for a long time, and they've got a great VPP program that you should make yourself aware of if you're developing a program. All right, so final thoughts. Running up on time. They're neither just or unjust. Their impacts depend on who can participate, how value is allocated, what protections exist, and whether equity is measured explicitly. Treat VPP, these metrics as core to the program, value resilience, health, and participation, along with these megawatt hours and megawatts. Design for inclusion, not just aggregation, so that we can build these VPPs that are faster, cleaner, and fair to all. If you want further reading, DOE's commercial liftoff pathways, great report. A lot of my friends at NREL help participate with. I mentioned CESA's work in Puerto Rico, and put out a recent report, I think February, on battery-based VPPs. Is worth reading. If you're interested more in the energy justice, Benjamin Sovacool and his team at Boston University's Institute for Global Sustainability, they've done just excellent work thinking deeply about the concepts of energy justice. And of course, you can email me. I'll share a white paper or anything else to give you some background. And with that, I will pause for any questions, or we can go to the next speaker and we can discuss
Yeah,
this.
well, I'm going to hold on most of the questions until after our second speaker, and we'll have more general discussion. But there's at least one question which asks you to clarify something, just so there's no confusion. One of our listeners asked if you could explain again what you mean by low capital device and aggregator-owned equipment.
So, you can quite easily change the temperature set point within a building, for example, that with uh, a low cost device. That might be one of the ways to provide that flexibility. Whereas if you're asking for solar and storage or two-way charging of vehicles, that's a higher that's one of those technologies that maybe the quote unquote energy elites will only have.
Okay, thanks. And aggregator-owned equipment.
Again, instead of having to buy system up front, perhaps you're working with a partner who is buying the equipment and then either leasing it to you or sharing it with you as part of the program.
Great. Well, as I said, we've gotten some other very good questions that we'll ask in the question period, but those of you who are listening and watching this webinar, feel free to type in additional questions. Adam gave us a very good overview of the relationship between VPPs and energy justice. But now we're going to see a case study of how this plays out in a real place at a real time. And we're going to hear from Lisa Morris, whose energy services planner at Vermont Electric Cooperative, which has an interesting program she's going to talk about. She began her career in urban planning and then transitioned to the energy world after she moved to Vermont in 2012. She's worked on variable peak pricing, community solar, net metering, beneficial electrification, and flexible load programs. Her work involves the interplay between policy goals and program implementation. She holds a master's in urban and regional planning from the University of Michigan. So, Lisa, let me turn it over to you.
Thank you. Thanks so much for that introduction, and thanks for inviting us to discuss our energy storage access program. And thanks to Adam for setting the stage here. So again, my name is Lisa Morris. I'm an energy services planner at Vermont Electric Cooperative. And just a little bit about Vermont Electric Co-op, who we are. So this is a map of northern Vermont. We were founded in 1938 in Eden, Vermont, and this is showing our service territory here in the bright blue. So we are up to the Canadian border, and then to the west, Lake Champlain, and then to the east in New Hampshire. And we mostly serve the rural parts of that area. So like town centers would be carved out and would not be part of our service territory, which is just the history of co-ops in the United States. They were funded by the Rural Electrification Act, basically to bring electricity to areas that were not profitable up to that point to provide electricity to. So we are a not-for-profit electric co-op, which all co-ops are across the country, as far as I'm aware, and we're owned by our members, which means that everybody who receives electricity from the co-op is also an owner of the cooperative. And our board of directors, again, is all our members who are elected by the co-op members. We serve about 33,000 homes and businesses in northern Vermont, and we have about 12 members per line mile. So just to give you sort of the context for the rural nature of our electric cooperative. So for about 5 years, we have offered a program called the Flexible Load Program. We offer it for both EV chargers and home batteries. And what that means is that we provide an incentive for members who allow us to access their batteries. They bring their battery into the program, and then we use it a limited number of times per month in order to reduce our peak demand, because many of our transmission and capacity costs are set based on the 1 hour a month when Vermont peaks, and then the 1 hour a year when New England peaks. So if we can reduce our demand during that time period, there are real savings for the entire membership. So these are the types of batteries that are currently eligible for that program. And it's really just based on whether we have a communication pathway and whether the cost benefit analysis is there, whether the fees are appropriate and we're able to pass some of that value back to the individual participants, as well as keeping some of it for our co-op membership as a whole. So we currently have about 200 batteries enrolled in that program, and it provides about 1 megawatt of dispatchable load. And we do have to still predict those peaks. So we're looking all the time at, what the expected peaks are for the next 24-hour, 48-hour time period. And then we're calling on those batteries to dispatch during, it's typically a 2 to 4 hour time period where we can discharge those batteries in order to ideally decrease our load for the month or for the year. So there's pretty obvious barriers to participation in a program like this. You do have to already own a battery that's eligible to participate in our program. And the cost of installation for 2 batteries, which is what we typically see, is about 2 batteries being installed, which provides about 30 kilowatt hours, which may be able to last for 3 days, 3 to 4 days, depending on what the critical loads are that those batteries are serving in the event of an outage. But the cost of that installation is about $25,000. So clearly that's not going to be available to most of our membership. And that's why we've seen, fairly low rates, because we just don't have that many members who have installed home batteries. And so it does, require them to fully pay for that upfront cost, and then we provide the incentive after the fact. So we had an opportunity a few years ago to apply for a grant. This was through the American Rescue Plan Act, which was passed, I believe, in 2020. And then that funding came from the federal government down to the states. And then there was some flexibility for the states as far as what they wanted to use that money for. And one of the programs that Vermont decided to focus on was what we call the Energy Storage Access Program. So we were able to get a $900,000 grant to fully fund battery installation for income qualified members. So we're fully funding about 45 installations, and they're 2 Tesla Powerwalls, and these are for low and moderate income households. So we targeted outreach first we thought, who could most benefit from a program like this? And we have a medical alert list. So members who, are potentially on oxygen or have, medications that need to be refrigerated, something where even a short outage can be particularly onerous to this particular population. So we first did outreach to that list of members. So we did emails as well as letters, and just sort of did it in a very targeted way, since we do only have 45 spots available in the program. And then we did outreach. Once we had, gotten those responses, we waited, I think, about 6 weeks, 8 weeks, and then we did outreach to members, households with less reliable service. So we targeted them next. And we sent emails and letters to about 400 members, and we received about 70 responses, and then kind of worked through the process with our local installer to see what types of electrical upgrades would be needed, have conversations with members, make sure that they fully understood the program before committing to it. And in our the one income category, so for everybody, the installation is completely free. And then for the one income category, which is 80% area median income and lower, there's never any cost associated with the program. For the moderate income category, which is between 80 and 120% of area median income, it's a $15 per month fee for 10 years, basically to lease those batteries. And then after the 10 years is over, in both cases, the participants own the batteries. So the program benefits for the participant, they get that backup, the battery backup in the event of an outage. It's 27.5 kilowatt hours with those 2 Tesla power walls. So that, potentially could last them 3 to 4 days. We have been seeing more windstorms, more weather events, longer duration outages. It's northern Vermont. We have a lot of forested areas. So it can take, quite a bit if we have, a lot of wind damage, especially from an ice storm, a windstorm, something of that nature. And these batteries would enable them to keep those critical loads online in the event of a longer duration outage. And then for the co-op, for us as an electric utility and for our membership as a whole, we get about 450 kilowatts of peak shaving capacity through those batteries that are installed, because we are using them. We will dispatch them in the event or when we're expecting peak demand. And the way that our whole battery program works is that if we know that, we could potentially have an outage event, some kind of weather event that we see, in the near future, we will not dispatch those batteries, because we understand that for all of those battery owners, that their number one goal is to have that backup in the event of an outage. So we are very cognizant of that when we're dispatching batteries. And then we also, as a co-op, have an opportunity to explore a non-wires alternative for a constrained distribution circuit. So that's another benefit that we added on to this program. So it's an area where we do see slightly less reliable service. And then also we have a circuit that's kind of nearing capacity. And so we are able to see if we're able to dispatch this fleet of batteries on this one particular circuit, if we can help deal with that infrastructure constraint so that we can avoid a costly infrastructure upgrade. So I'll just say that this is all happening in the context of a larger equity effort in the state of Vermont. So we have, a variety of programs, focused on expanding access to the energy transformation that we're undergoing in the state of Vermont. So we have, income qualified weatherization programs, heat pump installations. In the past, we have had EV incentives, free electric vehicle chargers. So there's kind of a whole suite of offerings that are happening in the state. And this is one aspect of that we are excited to have the opportunity to provide to our membership.
Well, thank you very much, Lisa, and thank you to Adam. We have quite a few questions to discuss here, and I will go through them and have Lisa and Adam answer them. But the first question is actually for me at CESA, which is, are there any resources available to help someone research which electricity systems are tied into VPPs. I'd encourage you to go to the CESA website, www.cesa.org, and right on the homepage, you'll see a link to our VPP initiative. And if you go to that page and click under resources, you'll see several recent documents that I think will be useful to you. One is a virtual power plant program summary table. It a table of a lot of the VPPs across the country that are in place. Then we have a report on program design for battery-based virtual power plants. And then we have a case study that Adam mentioned earlier, lessons learned from Puerto Rico's first virtual power plant. I think all of those will be useful. Let me ask the next question of Adam, which is, are VPPs only relevant to wealthier countries like the US and Canada, or can they be used and is there consideration of using them in the global South?
Oh, certainly. Yeah, the VPPs are a low-cost alternative. So instead of going out and building that next peaker plant or the transmission to connect that next peaker plant, if you can control the loads that are already connected to the grid much more cost effectively, you can lower costs, improve resilience, and address some of these other concerns that we've discussed. So yes,
Great.
we're seeing it across the world.
And Lisa, what happens if the people who are involved in your program and are getting subsidy for their batteries move? What happens if the new folks who come in don't qualify?
Well, that is a good question. We're not going back and requalifying folks. So if they do sell their home, they're supposed to notify us. But I think there is a cost to uninstalling those batteries and relocating them. And so we are just doing that initial qualification. And we do find that, many of our members are in their homes for decades. So we think that there probably will be some impact to, having, some home ownership transfer, but probably minimal in the program.
Great. And this is a question for both of you. And Adam, you may want to answer first in a general way, and then Lisa, you could talk about your experience in more rural communities in Vermont. Somebody writes in that they work in energy resilience in small island and coastal communities, and they assume that VPPs were more easily applied in bigger, more populated areas. Can VPPs work in isolated communities and small communities?
Did Hannah ask that so we could point to her report on Puerto Rico again?
No, it was not her.
No. Oh gosh, if you work on some islanded systems, and by the way, I've spent lots of time in islanded systems down in Puerto Rico and Virgin Islands and elsewhere. As you know, those grids are very weak grids typically, and they have much higher outages than the quote unquote mainland grids. And so the impacts of VPPs can be even more stated. So not only, so if you look at the ones, for example, in Puerto Rico, they've got storage, and then the owners of that, the homeowners or the business owners get to share in that storage. They get to decide how much of this do I want to use this storage to support the grid, and how much do I want to keep for myself should the grid go down. And so the benefits can be much more apparent to both the ratepayer and to the grid as a whole.
Great. And Lisa, do you want to say anything about the applicability in more rural areas that you serve?
Right. Well, we do tend to, like I was mentioning, we have had more storm events, especially in the winter time, which is a major safety concern for a lot of our members. So you don't want to lose power when it's 10 degrees outside, and it's going to be for the next few days. So we do have actually about 50% of our members have their own generators just in the event of an outage, but the other 50% don't. And so this was an opportunity for our members with medical needs, many of whom are, elderly, trying to stay in their homes, to take advantage of the energy storage access program and get that additional resilience and potentially be able to stay in their homes longer.
Good. Adam, you raised a lot of the potential risks about VPP development in ways that wouldn't advance energy justice, and you talked about the opportunities. But of all those things you talked about, what do you see as the main impediments to actually implementing VPPs that advance energy justice?
I think first it's like I said, sometimes we technical folk or we policy folk aren't thinking about the right measurements. So just understanding this concept of energy justice and making sure that your program and your systems are considering these measures of energy justice, I think that's a low cost, no cost way to make sure that your programs are designed to consider some of those factors.
Good. And let me ask another question someone asked. Do VPPs have to be managed and controlled and developed by utilities, or is it also possible for nonprofits to do that?
Yeah, there's lots of different ownership mechanisms and models out there, but certainly a nonprofit could do that, or a co-op as Lisa's doing. Many different models of ownership and participation in these VPP programs.
Hmm. And Lisa, have you seen other utilities, especially co-ops, express interest in the program you've developed? And do you see the likelihood that other similar programs will be rolled out, or are you a unicorn?
I don't think we're a unicorn. There are programs across the country. There are some actually in Colorado that have heard various things about that are pretty well established. So this is something, as transmission costs increase, as energy costs increase, as we have more distributed resources, so more solar, more wind, more intermittent resources on the grid, I think this is really coming to the forefront of what we're going to be working on over the next decade or so, is having more of these flexible resources that we can shift around. And I'll also say, just to go back to the question of kind of the assets, like what you need to be able to participate in these programs, is we really work hard to design our programs so that at least 50% of the value goes to our membership as a whole. So we're actually reducing costs for everybody, whether you're participating in the program or not. So that's really a focus of ours, is to leverage these programs to reduce costs so that we can keep our rates in check.
Good. And you talk about one of the big virtues of the program you have there in place is that it helps with peak shaving. Um, have you implemented, or are you considering implementing time of use rates to encourage more people to get batteries and participate in this sort of program?
We do have time of use rates that are available. So we have what's called our energy transformation program. So we provide incentives for heat pumps, electric vehicles, pellet stoves, various beneficial electrification measures. And then we've paired that with a time of use rate, so that folks can basically avoid, it's 5 to 10 p.m. is our typically when our peaks occur. So avoid that time period as much as possible by shifting load to other time periods. And what we found is that actually EV charging is the most flexible load. People don't generally care when they're charging their car as long as it's available to them and fully charged in the morning. So that's been a major focus of our flexible load program as well.
Great. Adam, you referred to Hawaii a couple of times. Do you happen to know if VPPs have helped Puerto Rico in storm events, or whether they can help in future storm events there?
In Hawaii or Puerto
I
Rico?
meant Puerto Rico. Sorry.
Yeah, they've already reported out benefits to during storm events where people have kept power, kept energy services, even though the grid as a whole has had outages. Yes.
Okay. And how about in the VPP program design process? At what point do you think energy justice should get discussed, and does it get discussed at that point?
I don't know if it gets discussed, but it should be discussed. You can only manage what you measure, and just putting some forethought into some of these injustices, but it's just the measurements of how we all share from this transformation of the grid. And I think we're seeing that more and more people really considering. We're spending a lot of money on transforming this grid. How do we make sure we're all benefiting from that money that is spent?
Okay. Let me ask you one more question, and then I have a couple for Lisa. One of our listeners asked whether aggregator-owned equipment is a big risk because that's linked to long contracts relative to the cost of the appliance, and the appliance renter will be linked into a long contract at high prices, and they're locked in, and that's a problem. Do you see that? Are you comfortable with folks signing up for and using aggregator-owned equipment?
I think the devil's in the details, of course, but a lot of people don't have the capital up front to participate in, go buy your own batteries, go buy your own solar, or bi-directional EV charging, for example. That's a lot of capital up front. So um, it diminishes the number of people who can participate. So aggregators are one of the ways, and now it's got to be done right, but aggregators and third-party ownership are one of the ways to make this more uh, accessible to a broader group. So yes, I think it can be done well, and you've got to think about how you measure whether it's done well, and the design of the program.
Great. And Lisa, when Vermont Electric Co-op launched its recent program and you were going to install 45 systems, did you do bulk purchasing? And if so, was that a strategy you'd recommend to others?
Well, we put out a request for proposals, and we got a few different options, and we decided to go with a local installer that installs solar as well as batteries. They do them together and separately. And so they're the ones who are doing the purchasing and the installation.
Good. And here's a very specific question for you, which is, um, can you say anything about your experience with Tesla's storm tracking software and the availability of battery energy storage during times of inclement weather?
I unfortunately cannot speak to that. Others in our office probably could in our power supply program, but I don't have any experience with that software, unfortunately.
Okay. And one other question for those folks who aren't getting subsidized participation in the battery storage program and who are purchasing the systems on their own, and you said the typical cost might be $25,000. Um, what's the payback period for them, or is there a payback period?
Well, I don't think you would ever be paid back for that. I mean, you're making an investment in resilience for your home, but in terms of actually getting that money back through our incentive program, anything else that may be available, I don't believe that you would be paid back. You do still get the 30% tax credit. So it would be 25,000 minus 30%, assuming that you have that tax liability. And then through our program, over the course of 10 years, you would get back, I believe it's around $6,000 in incentives. So you would be paid back for some of it by participating in our flexible load program, but mostly you're getting that resilience benefit.
Great, thank you. And before I ask another question, several people asked whether the slides will be available. They were very good slides. Well, you will all get a email after this webinar in the next couple of days with a link to the recording and the slides both on our website. And if you don't get that, you can still go to our website and find the recording and the slides. Somebody was asking Adam whether this focus on VPPs, yes, maybe we could do something to advance energy justice with it, but is this really a meaningful solution to all the load growth we're now experiencing? It seems small scale compared to the level of AI development, data center development, for example. Um, can VPPs be a meaningful part of the solution to load growth?
Oh, certainly a meaningful part. Is it the solution? No. But the load growth that we're seeing, I don't know how much of it's going to come to pass, if all of it's going to come to pass, but the numbers you're seeing are tremendous, and VPPs will not be able to be the only solution, but it's a tool in our toolbox that we should be leveraging.
Okay. And Lisa, are there ongoing support services available to the folks who participate in the program so that they're managing their battery systems effectively and um, both for the utility and also for their own personal benefit and their resilience benefits?
Well, I mean, I'd say for the most part, it's sort of install it and forget it until you have an outage. And then, what I've heard from people who have batteries installed is when the power goes out, they don't even notice. It's not even a blip, it's just a continuous experience for them. But I mean, anytime they have questions, we have our call center, we have our installer, everything in Vermont. One of the things we don't have in Vermont is always economies of scale, but we do have, we're very close to our membership and we're very responsive. If they're having a problem, they can call up their board member or, they can call us up and have those conversations. So we're definitely providing that ongoing support to the participants in the program.
Okay, good. Um, Somebody was asking about the status of VPP implementation in wholesale markets. I'd encourage you again to look at the VPP table and directory on our website because that'll give you a sense of where VPPs have been implemented up till now. But this is a very fast-moving arena, and there are new programs coming online all the time, and there are several states that have mandates to roll out VPP programs in the near future where their legislatures have required them to do that. So we're going to see a lot more activity, and that's one of the main reasons why we've launched the VPP Acceleration Initiative, because we think there's going to be so much activity in this arena, and we want to be able to give people technical assistance. Then, sorry, I just want to make sure there are a few questions I wanted to get at here that folks raise. Yeah, Adam, one person asked, do forward capacity markets play a role with organizing VPPs? And if so, how?
In the more, like as you said, VPPs are writ large are fairly new. But they're, we're not talking about new technology. It's more about the policies. If you look at like in California, where they've been around for decades, they are part of the forward planning process about where you need to build the next peaker plant, et cetera. Is that streamlined across the nation? No, it's not. And so hopefully things like your VPP initiative can uh, share this more broadly, and they can become more of the planning process for our grid as we continue to expand the grid.
Good. And
I'll just add to that. When it comes to our planning, that is the number one thing that we're currently looking at is our forward capacity market savings.
oh, good. Well, here's a question for both of you, both Adam, to answer more generally, and Lisa, if this applies in your case. Somebody was asking about the relationship between support for and promotion of battery storage and promotion of weatherization and energy efficiency. When folks have been rolling out VPP programs or battery storage programs, do they try to pair that with emphasis on energy efficiency and weatherization so that the home needs less power than it would otherwise?
Well, this program, I'll say, is not specifically paired. So our ESAP program is not specifically paired with weatherization and energy efficiency services. This is a population we could definitely reach back out to. But we have a very robust energy services landscape in Vermont. So we've had an entity called Efficiency Vermont, which has operated for about 27 years in the state of Vermont, which is specifically focused on energy efficiency. And part of that also is thermal efficiency. So they're doing weatherization services. Many of those are free through the Weatherization Assistance Program in the state of Vermont. So we do have many different programs that we're making our membership aware of through our newsletters and emails and our annual meeting and all kinds of channels. So this isn't specifically paired with that, but there are definitely opportunities.
Yeah. And Adam, is there anything you want to say on that? No, that's fine. Well, look, we have only a few minutes left. We have 3 minutes left. I want to give you each a minute to 90 seconds to say something you wish you had had a chance to say up till now but haven't, or to repeat something that you want to leave with people as an important message. Who wants to go first?
I got to go first last time, and Lisa, I'll give it to
Yeah,
you.
Lisa, you could go first and then give Adam the last word.
Yeah, so I just like to go back to the fact that this is one tool in our toolkit for our energy transformation focus, for our flexible load focus. There's, everything is changing very quickly, as we can all see around us all the time. And that's definitely the case in the energy world as well. I've been at the co-op for about 13 years, and pretty much everything I do now did not exist 13 years ago when I first started at the co-op. And I'm sure, give it another 2 years and I'd probably say something similar. So, we're just excited to take advantage of the opportunities as they become available. And then also, look for what other value we can provide our membership. And also, in service of reducing carbon emissions in the state of Vermont as well. That's a major focus of our programs.
Thank you. And Adam.
Just encourage all those smart people you have working in your teams to consider the human dimension of energy systems. It's not about megawatt hours and megawatts. It's about human well-being and how that's broadly shared throughout our society.
That's great. And I will take the opportunity to put one last comment in, which is there are lots of really good questions that came in that we did not get a chance to get to. A lot of these questions suggest additional topics we should address through our VPP acceleration initiative. We won't forget about them, and we may roll out additional webinars or fact sheets to answer some of the issues folks were raising here. I want to thank Adam and Lisa for excellent presentations and for sharing their experience and expertise. And I want to thank all of those of you who attended the webinar today. Please send us suggestions for additional webinars we should be doing on the topic of virtual power plants, because we're going to be making a significant effort in that arena. So thank you all, and bye.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.